is a really wonderful opportunity. And one of the other big things that Martha and I have been finding that works a lot for these kids lately is when there is a situation, as there often is, and there probably always will be, we're able to intervene at that time and kind of de-escalate a little bit by just going on a walk with some of the kids, taking a few laps around the building just to cool off. And I let them vent. I just kind of sit there and listen. Oftentimes they don't even take a pause and a breath. They just need to get it out. And walking is a great way for them to do that, to not only, expel what's on their mind, but, spend that physical energy as well, too. And so that's kind of what things are looking like today. And, we've got some fun upcoming things, too, some different ideas for Red Ribbon Week coming up soon. So we're continuing to learn about this process together and see how it can best unfold to continue to create these groups and these programs for these students. So I will leave it at that for the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Chelsea. Again, so much richness. We started this question, why do we need recovery high schools? And we approach it from a really personal level, but there's a word that I've heard everyone say, and it's safe, like a safe space, and if we take a moment and we look at the statistics, ACE scores are one of the predictors used to model like percentages, right? Especially when we talk about children, those adverse childhood experiences. An ACE score of 5 or higher, you're considered 10 times more likely to engage with substance in a way that's harmful, right? So that's around 10% of the population is self-reporting scores that high, right? So it's a lot of people, yet we only have 34 recovery high schools. And something else I heard you allude to is this idea that working with youth isn't the same as working with not youth, right? So this is a question I'm going to pass to Carrie and Nigel. I'm going to start with you, Carrie. Chelsea says in her experience, choice is really, really important to create safety, as well as that consistency. And I know, Carrie, you've worked with youth in a variety of settings. So can you share with us some strategies?
Yeah, honestly, I don't even know what I would call them strategies. I listen. I listen and I don't judge. Those are the two biggest ways that I connect with and engage my youth. It's amazing how much they will open up and talk to you when you just listen and don't judge or tell them what to do and why they should do it. Let them figure it out for themselves in a way. And a lot of times they get there.
Hi, Lisa and Chelsea. Just interjecting for a moment. There have been a couple of questions that came in, and I just wanted to bring your attention to them. There is one in the Q&A, and there was one that came in from the chat. So just let me know if you want to answer them now or go on to the next part of your presentation and answer them toward the end.
Thank you so much, Allison. Since we only have 45 minutes, we actually planned on going through the discussion and then allowing question and answer if there's time at the end, but we're also going to share all of our personal information to reach out to.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, we really want to paint this picture of, why it's so important. What does it look like in action? Can everybody hear? I'm not real good at math. I think there's like 87 of us. I don't know if that includes me, but who cares? What can we all do to continue this work? So regardless of if you have a recovery high school in your neighborhood or not, I think we can glean this valuable information, like showing up and listening, giving choice. And Nigel, what do you want to add about working with youth specifically?
Well, I think the difference for me is when you're working in adult treatment, obviously not 100% of the time, but more likely the adult has put themselves there, right? Or they at least are farther down in their addiction that they're like, okay, maybe I do have a problem. Adolescents are sent there by their parents or by their school. So my job at the beginning is not to be like, well, you're here because you're a drug addict, and how are we going to, that's not my job. My job is to make them feel comfortable and to hang out with them and to not pressure abstinence right at the beginning. They generally get there eventually. But the way I word that to them is how can I help you get to a point where you are willing to try abstinence, right? So it's just very, very vague, right? It's something that I'm really proud of about TRS is about 2 years ago, I set the current community down and I said, what do you guys want to learn about? What do you guys want to talk about? And we came up with, a bunch of topics. We ended on 12 and we made a schedule for ourselves. So each month we talk about a certain topic. And the reason I think that's so important is because I'm not here to get sober, right? This is their program. What do you want to learn about? What activities do you want to do? And that the music aspect, the art aspect that Chelsea was talking about, I mean, that's exactly, for instance, this month we're talking about spirituality. We have a lot more open discussions versus worksheets because I just want to have conversations with them and pick their brain and let them pick mine. But our weekly activities, they get to choose that. They want to go to Topgolf or they want to go bowling or see a movie. Great. Awesome. Let's do that. To me, that makes them feel more comfortable. The more comfortable, the more safe they feel, the more likely they are to open up to me. And I think having these levels of, we have executive director and teacher and therapist, and we have the coaches, and the coaches spend the most time with them. And the fact that we're younger, we're in recovery, we're not gonna, we're not dressed into the nines. We'll probably show up in like some shorts and a t-shirt. It makes them feel more comfortable and like they can trust us more. And I think that is the most important part and role of the coaches.
Thank you, Nigel. I love hearing those core competencies of peer work, regardless of the setting. It's based on that mutuality and the foundation of trust and safety. But also recognizing the audience and giving them autonomy. And I hear so many wins, right? Like picturing our own experiences, what it would have been like if we had a recovery high school, what it's like for the students who are there now. But I do want to take some time to acknowledge barriers. And I would be remiss to not mention that we don't have a student from a recovery high school on our panel. Chelsea tried, and Martha tried, and Nigel tried. Really, really extensively. And there's a reason for that. So, Martha, this is a question I'm going to pass to you because I think we can start with some systematic barriers. Like, what are some things that make this so difficult to get off the ground?
Yes, so it's a great question and a question that Chelsea and I talk about a lot. And one of the things I think that's the barrier is really having it's money. I'm going to be really honest with you. It's about funding. And right now, oops, are you there?
Hear you, Martha.
Oh, okay. Sorry. One of the things that is so important is the fact that we've been working really hard in trying to receive funding regarding Recovery High School because there's a tuition to pay for the high school, and that comes directly from our school districts. And what we're really, really working and advocating for is to be able to lower that tuition so any student can come to us that needs help and needs support. So the thing that we need more than anything else is the funding for students to come to us because COVID really hit hard to our school districts in our area. And to have the funding for any student that is identified in their school, to meet the requirements of a help me with that. DSM-5 criteria, we really need to make sure that they can come to us, receive the support, receive help from Rochester Regional as well as recovery. And we can't, right now it's such a barrier. And Chelsea and I and Rochester Regional have worked so hard to try to rally. We only have currently 3 students and our school should be full. It should be at capacity at the max. We should have at least 60 students. I could pull that from any high school I go to right now. And the fact that we don't have that many students is concerning to me, knowing that we're available and we can help students get not only their education, but they can have a clinician right on site, as well as recovery fitness support and peer advocacy. So it's really about the funding more than anything else, is the monies that need to come into us so that we can allocate those to our students in need in districts.
Yes, thank you, Martha. And I'll just echo way earlier in the chat, Angelia Wilson said, let your legislators know. And that's absolutely one of the call to actions I hope you all take away, is that our voices matter, from this entire conference, not just this panel discussion. So if you're feeling moved by this, definitely advocate by writing letters, making phone calls, but also voting on budgets, and getting the word out there. But why else do we need the word out there? So Chelsea, I'm going to pass it to you. What are some of the barriers you've noticed in working with students or families?
Yeah, great question. Very, similar, echoing, what Martha had shared too. The funding is definitely a huge piece. And, sometimes there are also a lot of little things too. Some little things that, not are necessary. I don't want to go into labeling things right or wrong, but just some things that can be a challenge sometimes. Things that are a challenge to exist, multiple things existing in the same space, right? They are also there to get their New York State education. But one of those challenges, when we have a student who's having a really tough day, maybe they're sleeping or just not in a headspace where they're capable of doing work in that moment, it can be really challenging on one hand, right? Because the teacher is trying to support them in their education, which is very important. We can all recognize that. But if a student is just not in that headspace for that day, they're not soaking up any of that information because maybe they have something going on at home. Maybe they're struggling with something personal, or maybe there was, some situation in school that day that kind of exploded. And so sometimes it's challenging, again, not right or wrong, but challenging for both that support and education to exist in that same space. And that's something we're learning how to navigate. We're working on that. And sometimes it results in, hey, you know what? This kid is just not in a space where they're hearing anything the teacher is saying. Let's just go for a walk. And then there are other moments that we say, no, there's something really important that, the teacher is, learning that day, and we've got to stick this out. And maybe we can schedule a time later in the day instead of having it right here and right now. And again, that may seem like something so little, but, in a student's mind, just from talking to them, understanding that can be a struggle for them. They're not hearing anything that's going on in that sense. And some of it is, I'm also learning too, I don't come from a school or education background, rather, I'm coming from the recovery field. So I have different things on the forefront of my mind and in trainings that I've gone through, versus, people who are in the education system. And so, we learn I'm learning that there is a lot of red tape in schools just in general, right? So learning how we navigate that, learning how I can be my best advocate with also keeping, right? It's very different working with youth and minors, as we've talked about, versus adults. Even simple things, like that COVID has changed for us. Now we have to try to get permission to just go do things. Even take field trips and something like that could be so beneficial to the students. And we all acknowledge that. But because of certain guidelines, it prevents us from doing things, or it prevents us from doing them to the full extent, right? And again, not right or wrong, just a challenge and a barrier that we're learning to navigate. Even just sitting on a lot of workshops lately about how the pandemic has affected youth and their mental health and their substance use. And it's like, I know those things on the forefront, but even just sitting and hearing some of these things on these workshops that I've sat on, it's a lot, So even when students were home and doing hybrid, that's a big barrier. A lot of these kids weren't showing up, can't sit on the computer or concentrate, or maybe didn't even have the technology. Little things like that. Every one of those little tiny barriers plays a part in this, to making it challenging to not only getting the education that they need and deserve, but also the support too. So we're really grateful to be back in person with these kids and learning how to navigate these little things. And I'm sure there will be more barriers that come along. But, Martha and I talk a lot about, how can we use these best as, instead of viewing them as barriers, how can we learn to get past these, but also how can we take those as growing and learning opportunities as well too? Maybe there's a barrier for a reason. I don't know. I realize that in my own personal life, but, being able to use these things just as learning opportunities. And yeah, I'll just kind of leave it there. I know we're kind of winding down on time, but yeah, those are just some of the ones that I've kind of seen firsthand.
Yeah,
Can I add one more thing? I'm sorry. One of the things I think that Chelsea and I are challenged with is having transportation, because ideally we would like to have after school and really wrap around care, both with our clinician and also with Chelsea and some of her teammates, because I really think it would be even more beneficial if we could have those things happen after the school days, because the challenge is constant for Chelsea to try to do her good work during the school day, during classes. And if we had the funding for transportation for our school districts, that would turn our school around. And I think that would make a huge difference, and maybe a big gym too for just Chelsea.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that kind of answers one of the questions that did come in, I believe, from Lucia, asking if recovery high schools are specific locations or extension programs. And I think they exist in both spaces, but that kind of is like that big systemic picture. How do we navigate permission? Because we are talking about youth. How do we navigate transportation, and so on and so on. But Chelsea, as you were talking, I was thinking of that metaphor everyone says, where you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself first so you're available to help others. However, I know when I was teaching, there was so much pressure about getting students to pass, or, Regents requirements. And I would know from a human point, meditation's helpful, to get people's brains to calm down and be ready to learn. But when I only have 45 minutes and so much pressure in a class, I have to make some sacrifices. So it's like, I feel like you're just reminding us, like, hey, the important thing is the safety and presence, and then the rest will fall in as needed. But again, that's a big systems issue. And when we're talking about systems, Nigel, I just want to go to you quick, and then we'll do closing thoughts from all of our panelists. You mentioned that there's no adolescent treatment program in Oklahoma. How does that systemic issue impact Recovery High School?
Well, we really had for a long time, we kind of had a pipeline. Oklahoma is small. And so pretty much everyone in the recovery field, whether that's personal recovery, adolescent recovery, clinical recovery, whatever it is, a lot of the same people. And we had a pretty good pipeline for many years, getting people from a high school to adolescent treatment straight to TRS. And the reason we did that, the reason that the school was created, was because kids would go to rehab and then go back to their school, and then they would get high, right? Because they weren't around the right people. And that's why we created the high school. Now, people have brought up legislation. The thing about adolescent treatment is it is very expensive and very extensive, right? Because the client is not just the teen, it's also the family. And that just gets really expensive. And so we just lost funding. And so I think we are growing, right? We have, as part of TRS, as part of our job is to talk to legislators and to get more activity around getting more adolescent treatment. And we are seeing IOPs open up, but not residential treatment. And we're working with them. But I don't know. It's the barrier for me is just like you said, it's money, right? It's legislation. It's also parents, unfortunately, because we know this is a family disease. This is not just like there's an identified patient, but it had to come from somewhere, right? And as long as along with those parents, it's also certain laws we have surrounding marijuana in our state, and the conversation of does that apply to us, right? Can we allow that? I think that being the only sort of wraparound services for adolescents and their families, we have to put quite a bit into it, and I feel like we're kind of a jumping off point for a lot of families. So a lot of barriers, but I think that we have had a good group of donors and supporters for 15 years that have really kind of transitioned us through that period of losing the adolescent treatment and supporting us just as the high school, and then ideally on the other end, trying to find some more adolescent treatment.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel. I really love this. I love everything you said, but there was this one quote, like, our clients are not just our students, they're their families. You know, I see in the chat a robust discussion about this need for wrap around support, which I wish we had another 45 minutes to discuss, to be honest. I am going to say this now so I don't forget. Chelsea's going to put all of our information in the chat, so you can reach out to anyone directly. I know all of these panelists are very passionate about their roles in these types of programs and would be open and willing to answer questions or pass you to whoever knows answers. But I do want to make some space for a minute or two for Carrie for some final thoughts, because I know you have a very unique and amazing lens on all of this.
I don't know what more I could say that everyone else hasn't already said. I'm just really glad to be a part of this discussion. You know, this brought up so many feelings for me. It's been a while since I've thought back to my high school experience, and I'm just so glad that that recovery high schools exist, and we do need more. And everything, you know, from a treatment perspective, having worked with adolescents for a long time, things have been so siloed. Everything has been so separate. And it would take a lot more time to get into why, but you know, there is a need for these wraparound services and for everybody to come together. Yeah, so my final thoughts are just, you know, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to be on this panel, and for everyone that is involved in recovery high schools, you know, keep going. This is so needed, so needed.
Beautifully said. And yeah, outside of working on legislation, it is that networking that's kind of been referenced directly by you, Carrie, and alluded to. You know, Recovery Fitness is a sober, active community. We don't necessarily connect that with schools, but here it is being powerful. You know, Nigel's experience as a peer advocate coming into the schools. So just thinking in creative ways broadly about that. And I do want to just say thank you so much for letting me be a part of this as well. And in the last minute, if Chelsea and then Martha and Nigel, if you'd like to unmute and say thank you, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for joining us today on this really rich discussion. Like, my wheels are already turning about more programs, you know, and I have to say, you know, just to leave with this, at the end of the day, like, whether students are identifying as being in the recovery portion or not, right, just our general population, what I notice the most is that at the end of the day, these kids still just want someone to talk to and to feel safe and supported and just a trusted adult to go to. You know, because I watch a lot of them who are not in the program, who don't identify as being recovery, but right on that cusp of, you know, going this way or that way in my path. And I think we can really make a big impact down the line systematically in all schools, you know, to push in with these types of services. So, thank you.
I truly appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And if I could have like 12 Chelseas, I'd be thrilled to have at my school. And I feel very honored to sit on this panel today and talk about the wonderful things of Recovery High School and the love and support, education, and recovery that we can help with our students. And it's just so needed, and I just feel blessed to be a leader of all of that.
And thank you so much, Chelsea, for inviting me to this. I also got quite a few ideas, and I think so much of this for me was just connecting to other recovery high schools, because I feel very much isolated here in tiny Oklahoma as far as this goes. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to talk to all of you.